Parkinson, the voice gets um, lower and softer with time and probably disappears ultimately.
So I was wondering um, if you could tell me. I know we were talking about some of the mistakes you think that we made when we were doing all of our work.
Or more likely, I was trying to tell you mistakes that I made long before we even started this part of the work.
Well,
When I was in the 70s, when um, and actually even in the 60s. What I don't remember what year the first our first adoption was. Do you?
90. I want to say 2000, around 2000, something like that, because we did the standards, but then the adoption followed. I know I have. I know that I have the framework was in 2007. Was that late?
The first framework.
The one that Beth helped write, put together.
Well, wasn't that the second one?
Maybe that was the second.
Yeah, I think so. Um, because before any of that, before we got it involved in the reading wars, there was lots of mistakes made, good things, but also mistakes made. For instance, I think we used to believe that every child learned differently, and that the mistake with that is concentrating on that and not concentrating on what every child should know, needs to know in each phase of when they go to school and what they're taught, and or the understanding that some things are taught directly, systematically, and plenty of practice, and others are taught in totally different creative ways. You have to know all that. That was not anything that was current or dealt with in the 60s and 70s, and people would always say to me, well, every child learns differently. Well, that's the wrong concentration. The right concentration first is what is the child supposed to know to proceed from one level to the next. And what can they do and what can't they do? So, but I think I can't do this in a systematic way. The mistakes are, intermittent. And the one I talked about this morning was when we just came to understand that Open Court was the series that matched our standards and our understanding of the reading research findings. That series, the publishers did not include internal assessments, which were critical. And I had been told that there were these two principals who were really great in Inglewood, Marge Thompson and Nancy Chinaga. John Mockler had found them, and Marge Thompson was the one who called me and said, we've ordered the new Open Court, but it doesn't have any unit assessments. We can't function without it knowing where we are. We need to have assessments. You need to let the publisher know that that's not acceptable. So I called the publisher at that time. I can't remember who all the other people were, but Marcia was one of them, to say, I have this complaint from Marge Thompson that we need, you don't have assessments. How can you, what are you writing to? That went on a couple of months, 2-3 months, and Marge was checking in to see. She said she had not heard from them at all. I remember this was really at the very beginning, and I called Alice and Marcia, figuring they represented Reading First and the publisher, and said, you have to do this. Well, but it didn't happen. So what ultimately happened was, as the year progressed and we got nothing that looked like unit assessments, I called Alice Furry and said, you have to produce unit assessments, because the whole thing doesn't function without it. So at the end, close to when they had to submit their material, she and Betsy Eves got together and locked themselves up someplace and studied the whole program and wrote unit assessments. Obviously, Alice was an assessment person, but these kind of assessments were different than, I think, what she'd been working on in when she was in the district office. So there they were, studying hard and writing unit assessments, which I think then prepared Alice to become, among other talents and strengths, the kind of leader who knew what she was talking about. She knew what was in the material. She became, normally most leaders in education do not have any real understanding of what the teachers are really supposed to be doing and what the kids are supposed to be learning. They just sort of go observing classroom to classroom, looking wise, but not really getting it. And she was forced to learn what was in the material and what should be assessed and how it should be taught. That was momentous because of its impression on her and on me. And then how that was one of the important turning points in setting it up, setting the way the program would operate based on the evidence we were finding. That's a very important point, because things in education are really not always based on actual findings. They go through a certain process, and then next year they go through the same process, and then they're not really aware of what is in the material or what the expectations are. So that's one thing. Let's see, what else did we talk about? Well, I said that most of what I had come to know, I knew because of I had a long history. I've been involved since the early 60s. And then I went to work in the department in 1970 after Wilson Riles' election. And I learned a lot from the mistakes I made. if you don't learn from the mistakes, it's really a shame. Maybe that's why we don't make more progress. But I clearly came to know that there were things that I was touting that really had no real evidence for, and changed my way of looking at things. And finding the research, of course, was fundamental to that.
Why do you think most people just keep
doing what they're doing?
Yeah.
Well, if you have a test now the state has eliminated the second grade test. You have no test till the end of third grade. That's just completely bizarre. They know what's in the text that they teach, or what is the current thought in the industry as the way to do things, and they don't see whether it works or not, because that's the next teacher. They never see the results, and that is totally crazy. If you don't know what's going to happen as a result of what you're doing, how do you know to keep on doing it? The interesting part is, which I think is best answered by E.D. Hirsch, is how we got into this. And I'm afraid I should go look up the date, but I think it was in the 1800s. I can't remember the name of the man. But one of the things I learned, and I learned this from a small piece, which you'll have a picture of it, is from Jean Shaw. And she says that education in elementary grades is of the mind that what is to be at the end, what is taught at the end in high school grades, the creative writing, and that it's the same at the beginning as it is in the end, what you teach. That's not true.
That includes figuring out how to read, right?
That includes reading. It includes math. I mean, if children don't learn addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, decimals, percentages, and fractions, they can't go on. But those fundamentals are not taught the same way as higher math. So it's exactly the same thing. There are foundation skills that are taught directly, systematically, and plenty of practice. And those are the foundation. You then go on. But that seems to be the real, don't you think that's the real place it falls apart? I think if you teach children playwriting in the 10th grade, they should be able to do that in the second grade.
Well, don't you think they think that if you get enough exposure to doing that eventually the magic will happen?
Well, guess what? And I'm not just talking about dyslexic children who of course are victims of this, but other children too don't get the kind of systematic foundation skills. One time, another state board, when I was on the state board, after I finished my department work, we were told that the National Foundation Mathematics Foundation or organization, something, you should know it.
I do.
at least you're married to one. So that they were having a national board meeting in San Francisco. Have I ever told you this?
No.
So they, and though they knew that our approach in California was, and our standards were completely different than the way they looked at things.
National
The National
Mathematics Teacher Association, or the National Association of
Teachers of Math.
There you go.
Okay. Highly contentious, and we were always, in a struggle about things like that. So they were meeting in San Francisco, having a national board meeting, and they invited me and my partner, who was the math person on the board, Janet Nicholas, to come and have lunch with them. I was kind of shocked by that. And in any case, you really want me, to come to lunch with you? Okay, so we said we would go, and we did. And they were, nice, friendly group, and the president, I think, was from New Jersey. We sat down at the table, and I said, well, I think we should first begin a subject that we all care about. Now let me figure out how I introduce it. Let's deal with long division. And I said, let's pick a subject. Let's pick long division. They don't believe in long division. But I thought, okay, let's talk about it. So one of them said that he thought that, let me think of the way he said it, that we should teach long division up to, I hate to mess up what he said, but I think it was, we should teach long division to 10. I'm not sure I'm exactly right, but it was a number, a low number like that. Oh, I said, well, that takes care of that, doesn't it? I think we should give up on this. What subject should we take up next? Because we were never going to be able to agree to their way of thinking about that. We thought you should teach children how to do long division as well as, and in a systematic way. They didn't agree with that. So we went home.
Wow. So you didn't even get to the learning, memorizing addition, subtraction, multiplication facts. The importance of automaticity.
No, that would be hopeless. So clearly they didn't agree with us about anything. But we had a group, many professors in mathematics professors in California at state colleges as well as university who thought we were, who supported our position about learning the facts and the foundation skills, and were very, very smart people. So let me see one of my other mistakes. Oh, well, a singular mistake was not understanding, once we got into the reading wars, even though I'd read E.D. Hirsch's really good book about how this got all messed up at the beginning,
The schools we need and why we don't
and
have
why
them.
we don't have them, which is one of my treasures. It still seemed to me that we made our standards and our requirements for the text, what do you call them? The frameworks. The first one in the reading. We made that as explicit as we could. We thought we wrote clearly. But why did so many publishers